Olá, boa noite a todos. Boa noite, Carol, Nathanael. Thank you, Sean, for our time. Good night in New York.
Muito bem.
Yeah. Thank you. Obrigado a todo mundo que está aqui nos assistindo. É um prazer falar com todos. Agradeço ao Sean pelo tempo disponível, por estar aqui aberto a falar com a gente. Carol, mais uma vez, por ajudar a gente aqui na tradução, para que a coisa fique mais fluida para todo mundo, né? Obrigado de novo, Carol, pelo seu tempo e vamos nessa, vamos aproveitar, ok? Eu gostaria, Carol, Sean, I'm talking to Carol to a question for you, ok?
Ok.
Carol, gostaria de já perguntar, a gente estava conversando antes aqui nos bastidores, né? Antes de começar, a gente sempre tem um bate-papo aqui antes. E o Sean estava falando muito da história dele na companhia de dança, que ele trabalhava como fisioterapia nas companhias de dança pelo mundo e tudo mais, né? E eu queria saber se foi ali nesse ambiente que começou a trajetória dele com o Pilates, e foi ali que ele encontrou a Romana pela primeira vez, foi nesse trabalho nas companhias de dança.
Okay. So, Sean, Fernando was saying thank you for you being here and giving your time to us and talking to us. And then his first question is saying that he knows that you were a physical therapist and you've been working with dancers in a dancing company. And he wants to know if there was through the dancing company that you had your first contact with the Pilates world and then with Romana as well.
Okay. Well, thank you all for having me. First of all, I appreciate it. Happy to be here. I was in school learning to be a physical therapist and dance. I got 2 degrees at the same time, dance and physical therapy. So I don't want to go too far. So I was taking dance classes in New York City, and the person I was staying with handed me a magazine, GQ magazine, and it had an article in it about this exercise system that dancers use to prevent injuries and to stay in shape, which is exactly what I was what I wanted to do with PT. So, and that article was Pilates. So that's how it's a back way into, it wasn't through my dancing, but I was dancing, and that's how I found Pilates in a GQ magazine.
Então, ele estava fazendo a faculdade já de fisioterapia e de dança, né? Ele se formou nas 2 faculdades, e aí ele acabou vendo uma revista, que é uma revista famosa aqui, já antiga, e tinha um artigo sobre Pilates. Então, foi onde ele teve o primeiro contato sobre Pilates, porque nesse artigo falava que o Pilates reabilitava os dançarinos, ajudava a fortalecer, para que os dançarinos tivessem uma vida mais longa. E era exatamente isso que ele queria fazer com a fisioterapia também.
And then I had a girlfriend who was Lori Coleman. Some people know Lori Coleman Brown. She was my girlfriend at the time, and she transferred from my university to SUNY Purchase, which is the first university to have a full Pilates studio in it. And she was working with Steve Giordano, and so I took a session with Romana and realized I wanted to do it, and then she was like, "You should come up to SUNY Purchase because Steve is here. They have a whole studio," and I started training with Steve. I'd visit Lori, and then I would go also do training with Pilates. So that's how I started to really get into Pilates, was with Steve Giordano, and he and I, when I first opened my physical therapy practice. He had Pilates and I was physical therapy, and that's when we brought Romana in and started doing things together. It didn't last long, but that's how I started.
Ok. Então, ele tinha uma namorada, e o nome dela era Lauren Coleman, e ela estava fazendo dança nessa faculdade Purchase, que é onde teve o primeiro estúdio de Pilates completo feito lá, e os dançarinos tinham aula. E daí ela falou, você deveria vir aqui fazer aula. Então ele foi lá fazer aula e começou a fazer Pilates lá. E com isso ele começou a trabalhar com um desses professores, fazendo a fisioterapia, e o outro professor fazia Pilates. E daí foi onde começou o contato com a Romana.
Nice. Nathanael?
Well,
boa noite.
I'm going to say one more thing, is that I was a dancer a modern dancer in Philadelphia for 10 years. And then when I moved to New York, I was 31, and it was, you can't dance for, maybe 35, 40. That's about it. So at 31, I had my degree in physical therapy, and I decided I stopped dancing and I started to focus on my physical therapy and Pilates.
Nice.
Então, ele já era dançarino há muitos anos na Filadélfia, e quando ele fez 31 anos, ele acabou se mudando para Nova York, para a cidade, e a vida de dançarino acaba sendo um pouco mais curta, a carreira, né, porque senão não aguenta muito fisicamente. Aí foi quando, aos 31 anos, ele começou a focar mais na fisioterapia do que na dança, mas ele era dançarino moderno.
Legal.
Alex, você tem pergunta?
Boa noite a todos. Não sei se todos sabem, né, que o Sean, ele tem um senhor acervo, né, do trabalho do Joe Pilates. E aí a minha primeira pergunta seria, do acervo do Joe Pilates, o que é que ele encontrou, né, de mais interessante, que, talvez ainda é pouco conhecido?
Okay, so we know that you, Sean, has a big Joe's Pilates archivals, and we'd like to know, what did you find the most interesting through all of your archivals that you have it from Joe?
Well, I got the archives because I bought Joe's business, right? When Joe passed away, the business went to Clara. Clara sold it. Mm-hmm. And then it was to a group of investors in Romana, and then they sold it to Isotoner, and then Isotoner sold it to WeTie, and then I bought it. So I'm the fifth owner, and all that came with it. All the photographs, his life's work basically came with the business. So that's what I inherited. And there's not one thing. It's all the whole. It's Joe's. It's his life's work. That's what's important, and it has his writings. It has the photographs. It has the film. His audio. There's audio tape, and I didn't get all of it that I have from just the business, because then I also in 1997 bought his property in Beckett, and there was all the equipment. Lots of equipment. There was, Benasiums. There was the Cadillac. The Reformer, the high chair. So there was that stuff. There was a lot of his books. So there's books that I have where he made notes in the margins about things, and when you read those notes, you sort of get an idea of his writings, what he was writing about, where he got some of his ideas. So it's all that stuff. It's being able to see his life's work, and then that's what I'm trying to do now, is bring that back and try to make his dreams come true again.
That's awesome, thank you. Yeah. Então o Sean falou que, na verdade, ele comprou o business, né, que era do Joe, em Nova York primeiro, né? Então, logo depois que o Joe morreu, o business foi passado para Clara, e daí teve o grupo dos investidores, né, que ficaram segurando o business até a Romana entrar. Depois disso foi vendido para o Isotoner, e aí foi para o WeTie. Então ele comprou através do WeTie. Então ele disse que ele foi o quinto comprador. E com isso, esses arquivos vieram todos, né, juntos, né? Essas fotos, os vídeos, esses arquivos. E depois, que daí quando ele comprou a propriedade em Beckett, né, próximo ao Jacob's Pillow, que foi em 97, aí sim ele teve um outro acervo que tem os aparelhos, né, que acabaram sendo alguns perdidos, as Benasiums, né, que é a cama com as molas, tem o Reformer Junior, tem a Electric Chair, ele falou, agora eu até esqueci quase tudo, mas ele falou que de fato não Cadillac, exato, ele falou Cadillac, isso. Não tem algo específico que seja mais interessante. Ele falou que tudo isso vai juntando e vai unindo a vida do Joe, né? Então é isso que é o mais importante, é ver isso. E os livros que ele tem, né, do Joseph, tem as próprias escritas, né, assim, anotações do Joseph ali, então dava para começar a entender como que o Joseph pensava.
E nessa transição, ele disse que foi o 5º comprador, né?
Uhum.
Ele acha que alguma coisa se perdeu? Muita coisa se perdeu nesse processo, Carol? Ou não?
All right, so Sean, Fernando is asking, since you were the 5th buyer from Joe's business,
Mm-hmm.
do you think that something got lost in a way from the other owners, the previous owners, until you bought it?
What do you think?
I don't think so much, and that's basically because of Romana.
Yeah.
So, when Joe passed away, and he thought he was going to live longer than he did, but he didn't. And, Clara came running the studio, and they brought Romana in. I know people say, well, they asked other people. They may have asked other people, but she's the one who did it, and she then did it, pretty much dedicated the rest of her life to, make sure that Joe's work was pretty much the way he did it. She added a few things and changed a few things. I mean, when she was at SUNY Purchase, you have an hour and 15-minute class. That's the way the classes are set up. Well, it's very difficult to do return to life in an hour and 15 minutes, right? So one of the things that that happened at SUNY Purchase is that's where wall units started. Before that, there was no wall units, and she put the wall units in so that she could do a lot of the Cadillac exercises with the mat to be able to make that class work. So, and then she used the same exercises and everything together that way. And so she added a few things. But as far as changes, I mean, I'm sure some things got lost. But with the archives, he was very prolific about documenting his methodology. I have there's 5 photo shoots for the Reformer over the years, different things in different times. And what you can see is that he didn't change much. There's some changes, for sure, but not a lot. And, I hear all the time people say, well, if Joe was alive today, he would have changed things because of the science. Well, first of all, show me the science. I always ask people to show me the science, and nobody ever can. So that's the training programs trying to say, well, this is that's unsafe and ours is safer, which is, there's no proof to that at all. I've never seen it. And if anything, the science is catching up to Joe. He said he was 50 years ahead of his time, and he was. I'm going too long. I'm sorry.
That's all right. I think
and then I'll continue after you get done.
Okay. Alright, so ele estava falando então que, na verdade, ele não acredita que se perderam muitas coisas. É claro que talvez algo pode ter, né, sido perdido, mas ele diz que a Romana realmente se dedicou muito a vida dela inteira, né, a manter tudo isso vivo. E ele também comentou que o que pode ter modificado um pouco foi que, como a Romana dava aula lá nessa faculdade, em Purchase, as aulas eram praticamente de 1 hora e 15 minutos. Então, como que você vai dar uma aula de math, né, o return to life, né, o retorno à vida, em 1 hora e 15? Então, algumas coisas foram ali adicionadas, né, provavelmente, e para preencher esse horário. E ela mesma, que foi nessa época que ela também criou os wall units, para poder dar acesso do trabalho que é feito no Cadillac, nesses wall units também. E ele também comentou que ele tem vários fotos, né, de arquivos do Joe, tipo a série de Reformer, por exemplo, são 5 photoshoots diferentes. Photoshoots são ensaios, né, diferentes. E ele diz que entre esses ensaios não se mudou muitas coisas. Dá para ver que alguma coisa pode ter mudado ali ou outra, mas que ele manteve o trabalho dele praticamente sólido desde o princípio até praticamente ao fim. E então ele era muito... ele polia muito o trabalho dele, ele dizia, só aprimorava, né, não mudava. E ele também comentou que hoje em dia as pessoas tentam, em alguns treinamentos, né, de professores, né, para serem instrutores, alguns deles falam que se o Joseph tivesse vivo hoje em dia, ele teria mudado talvez muita coisa, né, já. Mas ele acredita que não, porque... Na verdade, se é devido à ciência, então ele fala que as pessoas têm que começar a comprovar mais sobre isso, né? Porque a ciência não tem, então tem que mostrar para poder comprovar tudo isso, né? Então, basicamente, não teve muita perda, ele acha.
So,
I think I got it.
Okay, great. I don't know. So the thing to remember is that in Joe's day, it's not like today where everybody has a camera on their phone that takes amazing pictures. In Joe's day, to take a picture required a lot of time, effort, and money to make a photo shoot, right? So he did 5 photo shoots, and they're almost all the same over a 35-year period of time. Well, if you're inventing new things all the time, you're going to keep taking the same photographs of the same exercise pretty much, or are you going to add all the new stuff? And like I said, there's a few things that he changed, but the majority of it didn't, because the exercise did what he wanted it to do for the body with the apparatus that he invented. So that's, to me, the real difference is what you see is that knowledge is there, and you can see the variations. So there are some variations, but he didn't change it that much. So there's not a lot of change in his work while he was alive, because, and if you read his writings, Return to Life in Your Health, he was pretty sure that he was right, and everybody else was wrong. And he stated it a number of times in a number of places. So it's clear that I don't think that there's some change, but very little.
Então ele, né, continuou falando que, no caso, hoje em dia, para a gente fazer uma foto, um celular faz uma foto de boa qualidade, né? Então é muito mais acessível para a gente fazer essas fotos. Naquela época não, custava muito dinheiro, tempo, era caro. Então esses ensaios foram feitos assim, praticamente em diferença de 35 anos de um para outro. Então é uma diferença grande para você ver que ele manteve praticamente da mesma forma, né? A maioria dos exercícios se manteram da mesma forma, porque o que ele entende é que ele criou os aparelhos para que o corpo fosse trabalhado com os aparelhos, e não que fosse mudado exercícios, né, para serem trabalhados nesses aparelhos. E continuou as invenções dele, né, porque ele queria trabalhar o corpo. E também, o que eu esqueci de comentar na outra frase foi que ele comentou que o Joseph era 50 anos à frente do tempo, né, o Joseph mesmo já sabia disso. E nas biografias dele, né, no Your Health, Return to Life, ele acreditava que estava certo, né, ele escreveu, né, tudo que ele acreditava ali e confiante que estava certo.
Yeah.
There we go.
Very good, I guess.
Great. Ele falou, eu tenho uma pergunta aqui da Kátia, aproveitar, tá no ensejo aí que está bem... ela disse que a gente tem a sequência do Matt em livro, né? Joseph, pelo que eu entendi, foi essa pergunta. Há uma sequência, alguma coisa que ele fez sobre o Reforma também em livro? Se ele descreveu assim, exercício por exercício, ou ele ficou só no livro do Matt mesmo?
Okay. So, Sean, there's one of the people on the audience that she's saying, well, we do know that there is a sequence for the Matt through the book to Return to Life. And she's asking if there is a certain sequence to work on the Reformer, if you have any of that archival saying that from Joe.
Okay, there's a couple things, right? As far as the Return to Life, yes, there's the book and there's the order, but when he taught the dancers at Jacob's Pillow, it wasn't the same order, right? There was a woman who took the class in the 1940s with Joe, and she sat out one time and she wrote the whole sequence out and took notes and little stick drawings and everything else. And she donated those notes to Jacob's Pillow. And so the dancer version was different than Return to Life. Very similar in some ways, but there's, again, like I said, he changed a few things depending on the population. For the Reformer, it's pretty much the same order, right? And it's not necessarily the classical order that Ramana taught, because the box is a little different and things are done a little differently. But there is you can see the order in some of the older pictures, because he had, next to every apparatus, he had the photographs of what he wanted you to do. So at the reformer, you'll see that there's reformer pictures. There's a mirror, and there's a reformer picture and a reformer picture. When you went to the chair, there's a whole sequence of the chair. And then same, there's a Cadillac. He had a couple photograph sequences on the Cadillac at different times. Cadillac was an older apparatus, right? He had the massage table before that, which was kind of like a tower, where it was a table with just the bar on. You do all the exercise on. And one of those pictures in the background is shows all that stuff. So I think that as far as the order, there's an order for almost everything, because it's not like today where people come in and do private sessions, right? In Joe's day, if you had an injury, he took you in the back room and gave you specific things. But people basically came in and they got a system. They got a little card. They filled out what they did, and they would do their workout. And if they were lost, they could look at the pictures and keep going. And if they really had a problem, there was a teacher there that they could talk to, but it wasn't like you had a one-on-one session all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Ok, great, thank you. Então, ele falou que sim, né, a sequência do Matt está registrada no livro, mas também, se for ver as aulas que ele dava no Jacob's Pillow, a sequência era diferente. Então, teve uma aluna, uma das dançarinas lá no Jacob's Pillow, na época que o Joe começou a dar aula lá, ela fez as anotações de uma aula, e é até a aula que a gente experiencia quando a gente vai lá fazer, que é a aula 34, né? E é diferente, então realmente tem around the clock, tem outros exercícios que talvez ele não daria para a maioria do público, né? Então, como eram dançarinos, ele já modificou ali a sequência do Matt, então. E aí o Reformer, ele diz que não, né, a sequência é de um pouco diferente da sequência clássica que a romana ensina, principalmente a parte das caixas, né, do box, o short box vem em alguns outros lugares, o long box também, e ele disse que não tem algo documentado, essa sequência, porém, se você vê as fotos que ele tem, que são essas sequências do Reform, são linhas, né, de exercícios um atrás do outro, perto dos Reformers. E quando a pessoa se dirigia para a cadeira, tinha outra sequência lá, outro quadro de fotos. No Cadillac, outro quadro de fotos. Então, naquela época, não se fazia aula privada, né? Era assim, se você tivesse alguma lesão, alguma coisa, você iria lá pro quarto backroom, eles falam, que é o quarto de trás do Joseph, daí ele faria um tratamento, certamente, e daí depois você vai sendo autônomo, né? E se você está lá tentando fazer seu exercício e está perdido, tem um professor lá, tinha um professor para te auxiliar, né? Mas, basicamente, você levantaria e ia olhar as fotos e ver qual era o próximo, o que você tinha que fazer. E ele até mencionou que uma das fotos ali da sequência que ele tem é da massage table, que é a mesa de massagem, que parecia, né, uma cama igual ao Cadillac, porém menor, com barras menores. E também, se for ver, né, tem a Romana fazendo, né, com o Joe no YouTube. Got it.
And you even added some stuff.
I add some stuff saying about the massage table.
Right, and you added some stuff about around the clock. See, I get a little bit. You were there, so you know. So.
Exactly. I experienced that different math sequence. Yep. Então, ele tá falando que eu adicionei algumas coisas aqui.
Boa.
Deixa eu fazer uma perguntinha. Nesse caso, na verdade, duas perguntas. Já vou colocar duas. Se ele percebe, qual a principal diferença que ele percebe nos equipamentos que ele tem do próprio Joe, né, em relação à estrutura, enfim, se ele percebe alguma diferença muito grande para os equipamentos clássicos de hoje, e já que a gente está falando de sequências também, a relação de essa coisa do básico, intermediário e avançado, se foi a partir dele que surgiu essa ideia, se foi a romana, enfim, como foi a construção dessa questão de separar por níveis?
Okay. All right, Sean. So Nathaniel is saying, since we're talking about the sequence of I'm going to start with the second question, Nathaniel. Since we're talking about the sequence of the exercise and stuff, where the idea about the basic, intermediate, and advanced work came from? If that was from Romana, you?
That came from Romana and I.
Uhum.
All right, because Joe didn't. When you walked into Joe's studio, you didn't do snake twist the first day, right? There are certain things that you would do. They had a card and they would give you the exercise and you would progress. To be able to take this system and take it out of the studio, where she was, and be able to start training people, we had to come up with a way to develop a training that would allow you to teach the system. Because the first year, we tried it by apparatus and it failed miserably because people didn't understand the system. They just started teaching by apparatus and they didn't get it. They didn't get the intertwining of that. So to be able to do the basic, intermediate, advanced, I mean, that was really Steve, Ramon, and I that sort of put that all together. And I would have to admit it's probably a little bit more Steve in the beginning, but then as we progressed, Ramona sort of put it in that way and to make the manual, and so that we could do a basic training, weekend or a couple days. It was more than a weekend, but a couple days of training at basic and then intermediate and advanced, so that you could learn those systems that way and progress people.
Ok. Então ele disse, né, que sobre a sequência, a pergunta da sequência primeiro, ele disse que sim, foi ele e a Romana que criaram essa sequência do básico, intermediário e avançado, porque não tinha como simplesmente um aluno chegar pela primeira vez no estúdio fazendo um snake and twist, por exemplo, né? Então tinha que ser construído até chegar nesse exercício, né? Então eles criaram sim essa diferenciação e principalmente para ensinar o sistema para as pessoas, para que eles conseguissem entender, e muito mais ainda para os novos instrutores, porque disseram que eles tentaram fazer primeiramente por equipamento, vamos dizer, por exemplo, pelo Reformer, fazer tudo de Reformer, mas aí as pessoas não conseguiam entender, assimilar, porque não entendiam o sistema. Aí por isso que eles criaram o básico, intermediário e avançado.
Não.
Respondeu a sua pergunta?
Good. Joe,
Okay.
He documented his system a lot, but he did not develop a training program for teachers, really. I mean, Kathy Grant and Lolita, they did that through the state, and they basically went and watched Joe teach, but he didn't have a program that they came into to learn Pilates and a sequencing and finding out all that stuff. That's not how he was set up. And the audio tape that I have was a tape that they were going to use to be able to make it for teaching, but it was not broken down in that way. That was really a way to try to to take it from an apprenticeship into something that would be more, where it used to be you just went to the studio and you had to train in the studio. Well, Ramana's not there. How do you train that? So we have to develop that over time. So it was a mixture of didactic as well as apprenticeship to build a way to be able to have qualified teachers that knew what they were doing and knew the system and could teach safely as well. I mean, it's very much about safety as well.
Ok. Ele comentou, então, que realmente o Joe não tinha documentado nada disso, né, essa separação, porém, não tinha, né, um treinamento naquela época. Quando a Kathy Grant e a Lolita vieram no estúdio para aprender o sistema com ele, não foi nada documentado, né, foi algo que elas estavam estudando e foram lá para aprender. E então não foi dividido. Então, se você precisasse de ajuda, tinha algum professor lá para te auxiliar. Mas aí, quando a Romana veio, eles começaram a tentar selecionar, né, esses exercícios para que ficasse mais fácil o aprendizado, né? Porque antigamente as pessoas iam lá e só assistiam, como se fosse um aprendiz, né? Como se fosse, no Brasil a gente fala estagiário, né? Então, depois, na época da Romana, daí sim foi tudo dividido e separado. E ele comentou até do áudio que ele tem, que o Joseph está dando uma aula, que até aparenta que era para ser um treinamento para instrutor. Porém, não está claro, não tem como realmente saber isso, porque ele só está dando uma aula. Então, fica ali meio perdido nisso. E a outra pergunta agora, Nathanael, sobre os equipamentos?
Eu acho que o Sean ia comentar algo.
Sorry, go ahead, Sean.
Well, the other thing is that Joe didn't have a training Clara didn't have a training. The Ramon and the group of people, that investors didn't have a training. Isotoner didn't have a training. The training didn't start until Weetai. And Weetai started to put a training together, but his manual was basic. It was a basic training, and it was only the mat and a little reformer. There was no other apparatus in the training. And so that was all the training there was. And people like Moyer Stott and the Taylor sisters in Colorado, the Pilates Center, they only ever got a basic training from Romano, a certificate wise that way. So that was it. First thing I did when I bought the trademark was make a training manual and work with Romano, because we'd been working with Romano before that. But I opened training centers in LA and in Seattle and Chicago, and I made a training manual right away so that we could start to, get people certified and trained in the system. Because the first time I did a session with Pilates, I got off the apparatus, and as a dancer, I was like, why isn't this everywhere? This should be everywhere. Because I was learning Cybex and Nautilus and free weights and all that stuff in physical therapy. And as a dancer, it made no sense to me. You can build muscle, but as a dancer, I don't move that way. And Pilates was like, wow, this is amazing. If I ever get a chance, to do something, I will. And I got that chance when I bought the business and the trademarks. And that's what I did. From day one, I started to build a program that I felt was professional as well, which is because of my PT training and athletic training, physical therapy training, athletic training. I was also a Feldenkrais practitioner. So I looked at all these other programs that were professional and said, how do I do that with Pilates? And so the manual was the first place, that was the first really comprehensive training program ever. And so if somebody's got a program that has a few hundred and 400 and 600 hours, and they do all that stuff, and they have basic, intermediate, advanced, that all started with Ramon and I. That didn't start with Joe.
Então ele está repetindo, né, que começou com ele, com a Romana, essa divisão, né, do básico, intermediário e avançado. E o que ele quis dizer era justamente para que houvesse uma qualidade de instrução, né, para novos instrutores. E ele comentou que isso começou quando ele comprou, né, o trademark, o business, que daí, desde o primeiro dia, ele já começou a lançar isso em cidades diferentes do país, em Los Angeles, Seattle, Chicago. E ele, como um dançarino, ele disse que assim que ele acabou a primeira aula de Pilates que ele fez, ele gostou tanto que ele pensou assim, não, isso tem que estar em todos os lugares. Como que não está em todos os lugares? E como ele já fazia o treino dele de fisioterapeuta, e também ele trabalhava com educação física, atlética, que ele falou, de atlético, e algo que são profissões já, né? Ele falou, não, isso também tem que virar uma profissão, porque Pilates vai fazer um benefício muito maior, né, para um dançarino do que tecnicamente ficar só levantando peso, etc. Então era para isso que ele tentou fortalecer isso, e hoje em dia, se as pessoas têm, né, essa divisão nos treinos, começou lá atrás com eles.
E o que ele acredita que fez o Pilates, da época que ele começou a trabalhar com o Pilates, conheceu o Pilates até hoje, o que ele acredita que teve esse crescimento tão grande do método, Carol? No que ele acredita, né? Por que o Pilates cresceu tanto? Ele acha que foi os professores que vieram, foi o advento aí da internet? O que aconteceu que teve esse crescimento tão grande?
Okay. So, Sean, why do you think that Pilates got so popular lately? Like, it was because you guys started, putting Pilates out there, or is it the internet now these days that helps a lot to get more?
Well, it started, I took Ramon all over the world. Ramon and I, we went to Australia, we went to Europe, we went to South America, with Anelia, we went to Brazil. Ramona spoke Spanish, so it made, it was very easy for her to go, and a lot of Brazilians understand Spanish better than they do English, right? So it was a little bit easier. So that, I think, was the start of that. That was the seed that started the international, spread of Pilates. The lawsuit, in its own way, also promoted it, because if somebody's fighting a lawsuit, there must be something to it. When I bought the trademark, I spent almost 8 years trying to get somebody to publish a book on Pilates. And people would say, oh, the name's terrible, nobody will pronounce it right. They had all these reasons why, you know, they didn't want to write the book on Pilates. And so in 99 and in 2000, when I wrote, you know, I republished Joe's writings, and then I did the archival book, and I also did the Pilates Method of Body Conditioning with Romana. So we did all those books, finally got it published, and then as soon as I lost the trademark, all of a sudden everybody was printing Pilates books, writing Pilates books, and they were getting printed. So it's all these things. It's a lot of stuff.
Ok. Então ele quis dizer que são muitas coisas, né, que contribuíram para que o Pilates ficasse mais conhecido. Ele e a Romana, né, naquela época eles começaram a viajar o mundo inteiro, foram para a Austrália, Europa, para América do Sul, principalmente Brasil. A Romana, né, sempre falou espanhol, então era muito fácil ela se comunicar, né, com os brasileiros, porque até o brasileiro entende melhor espanhol do que inglês, isso que ele falou. E também por causa da Inélia, né, no Brasil, então foi muito mais fácil. Então isso internacionalizou o Pilates com o mundo. Aí logo depois ele tentou publicar livros de Pilates por mais de 8 anos. Ele ficou tentando achar alguma, como se diz, não é livraria, editora, obrigada. Uma editora que fosse publicar esses livros, e ele não conseguia, porque eles achavam que o nome Pilates era terrível, ninguém sabia pronunciar direito, não tinha por que publicar. Aí veio a parte do lawsuit, né? Como vocês falam lawsuit aí em português?
Do processo, sei lá, do judiciário, do processo.
Tem um nome, então, o processo, né, da marca, né, do trademark Pilates, que foi naquela época também, e ele disse que daí com a perda, né, desse lawsuit aí, desse processo, que aí todo mundo começou a lançar livros de Pilates publicarem pelo mundo inteiro, e daí isso também ajudou a dar essa internacionalizada no Pilates.
Uhum. Legal. E aproveitar sobre o processo do sistema que ele estava falando, eu tenho uma pergunta já sobre a formação de professores de Pilates atualmente. O que ele pensa sobre a formação de professores de Pilates atualmente, né? Eles devem apenas aprender sobre o exercício ou a necessidade de conhecer mais sobre o corpo humano?
Okay, so we have a question, Sean. What do you think about the trainings, the teacher trainings these days? And then the second question right after is, do they need to only learn exercises, or it is necessary to understand about the human body as well?
Well, you know, there's thousands of training programs out there now, so I have no idea what they're doing. I have seen many things where people use Mr. Pilates' name and do nothing that he taught. So, you know, that's the problem. With a trademark, the trademark says, you know, here is, you know, you're the source of whatever that information was. And, you know, when I got the trademark, I didn't register that trademark. I bought a trademark that was already registered. So it was, Romana had done that back in the 80s. So she was trying to protect it. The businesses were trying to protect it. I ended up losing it. And so once you lost it, it becomes buyer beware. And many people have thought that they were getting trained when Mr. Pilates was taught, but they haven't. And, you know, they find that out. And I've had, I don't know how many people come and say, you know, I feel like I got ripped off because I thought I was learning Pilates and I got something else. And it wasn't what Joe taught. It wasn't even close to what Joe taught.
Ok, então ele disse que muitos lugares, tem muitos treinos, né, no mundo inteiro. Ele não sabe todos os treinos que existem, mas ele entende que tem vários treinos que usam o nome do Mr. Pilates, né, do Sr. Pilates, que não ensinam nada do que ele ensinava. E ele disse que daí foi um dos motivos, né, que esse processo sobre o trademark, né, ele não criou o trademark, ele comprou o negócio que já tinha esse trademark, já estava criado antes pela Romana. Então eles só queriam proteger o nome do Pilates para que não pudesse ser usado para qualquer coisa, né. Então hoje em dia, como pode ser usado para tudo, é difícil dizer o que realmente né, o que é o Pilates hoje em dia. Só que ele diz também que tem, né, outros professores e instrutores que vêm falar com ele que aprenderam alguma coisa que não tem nada a ver com o sistema Pilates. Então, eles se sentem muito decepcionados, que fosse praticamente algo que eles tivessem sido enganados. Então, essa é uma situação que, né, ainda acontece muito hoje em dia. Aí ele não chegou a responder sobre a parte do corpo humano.
Let me answer the second part now.
Yes, that's what I was saying. It did answer.
Right. So the second part is, you can be an amazing Pilates teacher and never know anything about anatomy.
Yeah.
You don't need anatomy, you know, but that being said, Joe had all over the walls anatomy pictures and anatomy information. Will you be a better teacher? I think so. I teach anatomy. I taught anatomy in the university for 24 years. 9 of those years was cadaver anatomy. I was assistant for the cadaver anatomy and a professor as well. And then I taught for anatomy for dancers. So I'm a big believer in anatomy. The problem is anatomy takes everything into this one little piece, this little muscle. And so I now see so many Pilates teachers teaching anatomy and not teaching Pilates, right? Because they don't understand, so they've been taught, they know a lot of good anatomy, but they don't understand the system. They don't understand his work and how it's supposed to work. And because you can't isolate muscle that, the brain doesn't work that way. Make this muscle work. Well, you can do that, right? But but you can also train a monkey to do that too. It's not something. It's not what we normally do. When you look at an acrobat or a dancer, they do amazing things, but it's training that does that. Okay, so I really think that yes, you can be a better teacher, but you can also be an amazing teacher with very little anatomy knowledge. It really depends on the kind of person you are and whether you see what you see. Because teaching is not, all this didactic information in your brain. It's what you see in front of you and how people move and how they function and how do you use the exercise, the apparatus, and your hands, which we can't really do as much anymore, to really make those changes and your voice and your body as well. You have to practice Pilates to teach Pilates. So, and when they're not practicing, it's a problem. So that was kind of long. Sorry about that.
Yes, I think I got it. Então, ele está dizendo que, sim, a anatomia com certeza beneficia, né, o professor que entende, porque, afinal de contas, nas paredes do estúdio do Joseph tinha, né, os quadros de anatomia por todos os lados. E ele, em si, é professor de anatomia, então ele é um grande believer, ele falou, ele acredita muito em anatomia, e ele ensinou anatomia, foi professor de anatomia por mais de 20 anos, e 9 desses anos ele se especializou em cadáveres. Então, e os outros anos ele fazia anatomia para dançarinos. Então, ele entende bem essa parte do corpo e acha que sim, beneficia o trabalho do instrutor de Pilates. Porém, ele diz que a anatomia acaba virando só uma coisa condensada pequena, só um pedaço do trabalho. E muitas vezes é só um pedaço do trabalho do sistema inteiro, né? E muitas vezes o professor fica focando tanto naquilo que acaba ensinando a anatomia ao invés de ensinar o sistema. Então fica assim meio tentando isolar o músculo. Não tem como isolar o músculo, ele falou, né? Não tem. E o cérebro não entende isso, né? Quando você tenta fazer esse isolamento. E ele falou que o que muda mesmo é o treinamento. Como você treina uma pessoa. Ele até mencionou que até um macaco pode ser treinado a mexer o braço daquele jeito, né? E ele falou também o que mais importa para um professor ser melhor, né? A anatomia auxilia sim, mas como você treina. Você tem que treinar no seu corpo para você poder dar aula e a sua voz, o seu desempenho na aula, como que você toca na pessoa, né? Hoje em dia está um pouco limitado o toque, mas é tudo isso que faz a diferença num professor ser melhor.
Legal. Eu tenho
Can I say one more thing?
Yeah, of course.
So Ramana is a perfect example. Ramana didn't have a broad breadth of anatomy, physiology, all those things, and she was an amazing teacher. Me personally, I've spent the last 20 years, studying, researching, and trying to figure out why Pilates works so well. I mean, I know it works in my own body, but the question is why. So, and what my workshops have been in the last 10 years are mostly trying to educate Pilates teachers on why it works so well in relationship to the different body systems, because they all work together, and that is the physiology and the science and the neurology and everything else. And I think it's, so I think it's important, but at the same time, my teacher didn't have all that, and she was an amazing teacher. So, but she also had 40 years of experience, and she also had it in her body by doing it. So it really depends. I definitely think you can get a lot better if you have that other information, but you don't need it.
Yeah.
Então, ele está só reforçando, né, o porquê ele acha que sim, te auxilia, né, a entender mais de anatomia, fisiologia e tudo mais, mas ele também remeteu a Romana. Ela não tinha um conhecimento muito vasto de anatomia e fisiologia, e ela era uma professora incrível, né. E aí ele diz ainda que ele, né, tem buscado há mais de 20 anos o porquê o Pilates funciona tão bem no corpo, né, das pessoas, comparando com as outras atividades físicas. Então, ele diz que ele tem buscado muito isso, ele dá aula para outros professores de Pilates, né, instrutores, nos treinos dele, e ele traz a ciência, ele traz a filosofia, a fisiologia, neurologia, tudo isso do sistema, dos exercícios, para entender melhor o porquê que funciona tão bem no corpo humano. E ele disse que a Romana também, né, por mais que ela não tivesse todo esse conhecimento técnico, ela tinha o conhecimento do Pilates no corpo dela, por mais de 40 anos, e por isso que ela era uma professora maravilhosa.
Vai, Nathaniel. Vai.
Encaixando nessa... Tem uma pergunta minha que ficou pendente, viu, Carol? Mas, encaixando nisso, a gente vê que alguns exercícios, a forma como Romana passou, é diferente do que a gente encontra, por exemplo, no livro Return to Life. Essa mudança veio dessa primeira separação entre básico, intermediário e avançado, foi pensada por Chan e Romana, ou já veio depois só com a Romana? Por exemplo, Spine Straight Forward, que a gente vê no livro de uma forma. Ou tinha um arquivo depois, com Joseph fazendo diferente?
Ok. So he's asking about the exercise. They did change over a time because on the Return to Life, it was like Spine Stretch Forward was teaching in one way. Was that changeable from Ramona doing it, the way that she taught, or that came later on?
Okay, so what my understanding is that, I said this before, Ramona did change a few things. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the exercises she definitely changed, because in classical, and when I say classical, it is a generic term like Pilates, and now that's become popular, so everybody says they've been classically trained, but classical really came from, that was Ramana's training, right? That was what, when you look at classical, originally that's what it was. Now it's become, who knows, again, it's like Pilates, who knows what it is. But in her training, when you do spine stretch forward, you pick those arms that are parallel to the floor and you round your spine out as you go forward. You don't touch the floor. Joe, you're sliding through the floor and you're doing it in a different way. So there is definitely changes. And I'm pretty sure that was Ramana. I can't tell you 100% because, what's really interesting is that we have all these questions today. But when Ramana was alive, you didn't really think about those questions because they weren't important, and they weren't that important. But now we're trying, the difference is you have so many people competing and saying this is better, that's better, this, whatever it is. So now we want to say, well, where did that change, and how did that happen, and who did that, and all these other things. So there are definitely changes.
Okay. Então, ele diz que sim, houve mudanças, né, como ele já tinha mencionado mais cedo, e, de fato, não sabe de onde vem. Ele acredita que vem da romana porque ela ensinava Pilates clássico. Na época dela, Pilates clássico era o que ela ensinava em si. Hoje em dia, Pilates clássico está mais popular, então está se tornando outra palavra genérica, tanto quanto o nome só Pilates, né? Então, sim, era ensinado com as mãos em cima, né? Foi como ele aprendeu, e no livro do Joe é diferente. Eu esqueci de perguntar se tem algum arquivo que tem diferença. Vou perguntar rapidinho. Sean, I forgot a little part of the question. Nathaniel was asking, so if there was any archival that would show the difference. So probably not, right? Because you said that it's from Romana.
If you look in the archives, I mean, return to life is the mat. And that's the picture-wise, that's all we have, and the writings. In his archives, there wasn't anything else that way. We have the notes from the dancer from the 1940s, and her notes back up, or pretty much for that exercise, are very close to what Joe said, right, and the way Joe taught it. So it's pretty clear that it came from Romana, but I can't. I only got to Pilates really in 1990 when I really started working with Romana. So what she did before then, I can't tell you 100%. As far as what happened from 1967 to 1990, which is again 2 decades, a little bit more than 2 decades. So, and there are definitely changes. So I can't. It's not documented as far as I know. I mean, it wasn't in the archives. Let's put it that way.
Ok. Então ele fez a comparação do Return to Life para a aula, né, que a gente já comentou mais cedo, lá do Jacob Spillo, que a dançarina fez as anotações, que foi em 40, e o exercício é descrito da mesma forma, como está no Return to Life, com as mãos embaixo. Então, ele entende que, sim, foi uma mudança da romana, porque ele só começou Pilates nos anos 90. E antes disso, a romana já estava dando aula há mais de 20 anos. Então, antes dos anos 90, ele não sabe o que ela criou, né, em si, quais mudanças. Então, e nada disso foi documentado.
Legal.
Minha pergunta dos equipamentos.
Ok, pode ser agora? Fernando, primeiro.
Aproveite, vai.
Hey, Sean, I have the old question for Nathaniel from previously, half an hour ago, I guess.
Okay.
He was asking about the equipment. So the equipment, since you bought Joe's property, you have a lot of his equipment. So how do you see the difference between Joe's original equipment from today's equipment that we see in the market?
Well, the equipment's like trainings. There are how many manufacturers of Pilates equipment today? I haven't seen it all, and I don't go to look for it because I have Gratz equipment, or I have, and the equipment I have from the studio up in Beckett was the equipment he had in his studio for almost 40 years. So it was old then, and older than so it's not that usable. It's more for, that's going to be the museum part. But what I did do, I made equipment back in the 90s. I had an equipment company. I tried to, I reproduced Joe's claw foot reformer. His bench mat, all the different apparatus. Like my studio in New York, I put it in storage, but because of the pandemic and we were closed. But I have a reproduction of his Cadillac. I have a reproduction of the high chair that was in the studio. I have the blueprints for the Wonder chair. I have the baby chair, original before it was a baby chair. So there are definitely some differences, but people split pedals and this and that. No, I mean, there's so many things that I see, and it might be good. I don't know. I don't use it because I use Joe's work and it does everything I need it to do. I don't need all that other stuff. That to me, I think the way I think what happened with equipment is you had people who were not fully trained.
Mm-hmm.
They don't understand the system. They don't know all the apparatus, and they have a reformer or they have a chair, and they go, "Well, I can't do it. Somebody's having trouble. Can you make this way so I can do this here?" So they don't understand the system. So they ask the manufacturers to make changes, and the manufacturers will, whatever you want. I'll make you whatever you want as long as you buy my equipment, because that's how they make money, right? So yeah, I think that's what's happened, and especially with the springs, because what you see with springs, people have the different colored springs that are different resistances, right? And that's trying to put traditional exercise into Pilates. And that's not how Pilates used his system. Because traditionally in exercise, I'm going a little far, I'm sorry. Traditionally, I'm trying to go a little slow so you can write it down.
Mm-hmm.
Traditionally in exercise, to get stronger, you always have to increase the resistance. And if somebody's not, if it's too much, then you do less resistance because they're weak. But in Pilates, it doesn't work that way, because sometimes less is more.
Yeah.
Right? It's because it's a balance between the stability and the mobility. And the way he set up the springs allows that to happen. So when you start if you change the apparatus, you change the spring, you change what the exercise does to the body. So you're not going to get the same results that Joe claimed when you do all these changes. That's enough. Sorry.
That's all right. Então, ele começou já mencionando que hoje em dia as empresas de equipamentos são iguais aos treinamentos, né, para novos instrutores. Tem muitas. Ele não conhece todas. Então, o que ele realmente conhece, que ele trabalha, é Grotz. E nos anos 90, ele mesmo criou os aparelhos dele por uma certa época, que foi baseado aos aparelhos originais do Joseph. Ele fez um Cadillac, fez High Chair, fez a Baby Chair. E o que ele tem lá em Beckett, do Jacob's Pillow, ele, na verdade, não tem como usar esses equipamentos, porque são equipamentos que estavam lá há mais de 40 anos, então eles só vão ser usados para o museu, né, como se fosse só para apresentar, né, então não tem como saber a diferença em si, mas está sendo reproduzido, né, partes deles, né, como as molas. Eu já chego lá nas molas e ele comentou também que só sobre as molas agora. As molas hoje em dia, elas são coloridas, elas são diferentes, por exemplo, né? Então isso acaba mudando como o exercício deve ser funcionado nesse aparelho, né? Porque na época do Joe não tinha essa opção, você tinha aquela resistência para você trabalhar o corpo no aparelho, não o aparelho se acomodar ao seu corpo, né? Porque o que ele entende é que parece que as pessoas não entendem o sistema, então simplesmente eles querem conseguir fazer o exercício. Então eles pedem para que os equipamentos vão sendo modificados para isso e aquilo, para ajustar para o corpo deles, e não vão ter o benefício, né, necessário que precisaria. E a diferença entre atividade física comum, tradicional, vamos dizer, as pessoas aumentam a resistência para ficarem mais fortes, né? E no Pilates é o contrário, quanto menos, melhor, né? Quanto menos mola, melhor é, né? Então é isso que ele comparou também. Será que eu peguei tudo, Fernando?
Ele falou que menos é mais, né?
Menos é mais.
Menos é mais. Sempre menos é mais.
Isso. Trabalha mais, né?
Exato. E entrando nessa, tem uma pergunta que era para colocar sobre se ele sabe se há alguma coisa de standing pilates nos arquivos ou alguma coisa desse sentido.
Ok. Sean, he's asking about if there is any of the standing Pilates sequence or in the archival.
Well, there's film and there's also photographs. He did a whole photo shoot of the whole sequence for the standing. Matter of fact, the first time that was taught after Joe died, as far as I know, was in Brazil, because I went and taught the standing mat for Enélia probably 10 years ago.
Nice.
Cool. Então, sim, tem filmes dele exercendo o standing mat e tem fotos, né? Então, estão nos arquivos, sim. E ele diz que a primeira vez que acabou sendo ensinado essa sequência foi há 10 anos atrás, quando ele foi ao Brasil, ele mesmo ensinou lá para Enélia Garcia.
The important thing about the standing mat is, I see many people talking about don't do this, don't do that in Pilates because of osteoporosis.
Mm-hmm.
And for osteoporosis, you need weight bearing, right? But you also, the two ways the bone gets strong is through weight bearing and pulling of the muscles. So Pilates did both because he had a whole standing mat where you were doing all that weight bearing exercise through your skeleton to help build bone strength. But most people don't teach that.
Yes. Então ele fez um gancho ali com, hoje em dia, muitas pessoas falam que talvez Pilates não é bom para quem tem osteoporose, né? Mas ele falou como que melhora uma osteoporose. Você precisa fazer o músculo trabalhar, né? Ali ele falou pulling muscles, então trabalhando os músculos. E o weight bearing, quando você põe o peso do seu próprio corpo nos exercícios, né? Utilizar isso. Então, o standing mat é uma maneira de trabalhar, assim, uma pessoa que teria osteoporose.
Exato.
Só um adendo, Fernando. Perguntaram há um tempo atrás aí se aquele busto é o busto original do estúdio, né? Sim, é o busto do estúdio.
Legal.
E tem pergunta aí.
Sobre o processo do trademark, seria o processo de liberação do nome, se o Joe chegou a registrar a marca ou se foi tentado esse processo só com ele e a Romana?
Okay, Sean, they're asking about the trademark lawsuit. If that you mentioned that the lawsuit was already registered, not the lawsuit, excuse me, the trademark was already registered before. Was it Joe?
No.
Did Joe register that before?
No, because you don't. You really can't register your own name as a trademark.
Okay.
Right? It's very difficult to register your name. Like, I'm going to go register Gallagher. I mean, it's not so easy, and it even says you're not really supposed to do that per se. And Joe did, he intertwined Pilates with contrology, but he liked contrology, right? It was Romana who trademarked it, and I believe the first time was in 1982. I believe it was 82. And that was 8 years, and that was basically because people were starting to abuse the name, and she wanted to protect it. Joe put plaques on everything. He copyrighted his stuff. He was very protective, but it was a different time, and you didn't have all these people trying to make Pilates studios or saying they were teaching Pilates. I mean, if you think about it, even the elders, right? Who was it? Eve Gentry. When she left, she didn't go out and say, I'm teaching the Pilates method. She went out and said, I'm teaching the Eve Gentry method.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't until Pilates became famous, and obviously her Eve Gentry method didn't take off like she was hoping, and so they came back to Pilates. Same with Ron Fletcher, the Fletcher method. Well, and they all added their own stuff to it, but they didn't call it Pilates, they didn't call it contrology. They used their own name, but took his work and infused, and it was mostly his work. And it wasn't until basically, if you look at historically, they started to come back and do Pilates because Pilates started to become popular, and they could make more, they could do more and make more money because their systems and their methods weren't necessarily taking off the way they thought they were going to do, even though they were using Joe's work.
Então ele falou que naquela época, até hoje em dia, é muito difícil fazer um registro de uma marca com o seu próprio nome. Então o Joe não chegou a fazer isso, e ele também chamava o sistema como contrologia, né? Contrology. E daí foi com a Romana, sim, ele acredita que foi em 82 que a Romana registrou a marca Pilates, porque ela começou a perceber que o nome estava sendo abusado, né, usado para coisas que não estava sendo realmente o método, né, e ele usou o exemplo ali de outros elders, né, a Eve Gentry, e também usou do Ron Fletcher, que criaram o método deles. Eles abriram o estúdio deles falando que era o método deles, porém, mais tarde, quando o Pilates começou a ser mais popular, eles mudaram para usar o nome Pilates também.
E logo em sequência, ele não acha que a ideia de manter fechado o nome, né, também não ajudaria a distorcer a ideia do que realmente é Pilates, porque você deixa num grupo, você deixa o nome, o método fechado em um grupo, né? e as pessoas acabam não entrando naquele grupo e acabam distorcendo o que é Pilates por fora. Se ele não acha que também... Eu entendo que tentar fechar, às vezes, é uma questão de proteção, mas se de repente fechar demais, não tornaria o método tão desconhecido e tão distorcido depois no futuro.
So they're asking if you think like once the method was more going towards the Pilates studio, was close to them to use the method, do you think is that not, I'm not sure how can I say that, but isn't that like more approachable for other people create their stuff because they don't have access to the original stuff as easily as they could have it?
Well, there's always been access. You have to, you know, it's not like there wasn't a training program to come and do. There's a training program in Brazil. We took the trademark and we took the training to Brazil. You can do it. So I understand that people want to do their own thing and they want to go off and do this, and that's just what happens. I mean, that's capitalism, right? And again, a trademark allows you to be the source. And if there's not a trademark and it's generic, then it's buyer beware. There's a difference. It's really simple. So it's not really about you know, whether the name was better or worse or whatever, and more accessible. It was accessible, and it's always been accessible. It has never not been accessible. Let's put it that way. Now, other people want to make, you know, they want to make the money instead of, you know, me or whoever else was, you know, Ramon or Everett. So they want to do the same thing. I have a nice studio. I build the studio up. People come and they work out and they're like, oh, I want that. Okay. But they can't just take you just can't take whatever somebody else has done. That's especially when there's a trademark. Once there's not a trademark, you can do it. I mean, how many trademarks have the name Pilates in it today? Everybody's trying to differentiate their own version of Pilates. The difference is my version is the source. I mean, it's the archives, it's the equipment, everything is that's Joe. I mean, and this is what Joe did. And also, I have the first official training manual. It's copyrighted. I don't, you know, I've had to sue people that have, you know, taken my manual and whited out the trademark and sold it. Or I had one person who copied all the text in my manual. They did the training partly. They left in the middle. They took my manual, copied all the text, including mistakes. So they didn't even proofread it. And they put their own pictures on it. So, you know, people will do all sorts of things to, you know, to get ahead and do the other thing. But it has always been available.
Thank you.
Então, ele disse que sempre esteve acessível a todos, sempre esteve acessível. Eles levaram, principalmente para o Brasil, né, o The Pilates Studio com a Inélia, sempre teve o treinamento acessível, né, para aprender esse trabalho. Então, a questão que as pessoas, às vezes, não tinham como, né, procurar fazer isso, acabavam criando a sua própria coisa, né, e quando se tem um trademark, na verdade, não pode ser feito isso, né, de qualquer jeito. E aí ele acabou comentando, né, que isso é o capitalismo, então ele acha que isso é muito simples, acesso sempre teve. E logo em seguida ele falou que ele ensina, sim, o source, né, da onde veio. Por que ele chama de source? Porque é da onde veio, é onde ele vê nos arquivos, eles criaram o primeiro manual, então eles têm esse primeiro manual, e que no qual ele já teve que acabar processando pessoas que usaram o manual dele, tiraram a marca da água dele e venderam como se fosse deles, e isso não é certo. E teve outras pessoas que copiaram os textos do manual dele, inclusive com os erros que ele tinha cometido nos textos, e simplesmente usaram as fotos, né? E isso eram pessoas que tinham ido estudar com ele, né? Fizeram só um dos cursos. Enfim, você acha que...
You know, when you have a trademark battle, right, that means there's value. Otherwise, you wouldn't be spending the money to protect the trademark. Somebody wouldn't be fighting you to get the trademark. And at the end, there's a winner and there's a loser. And guess what? The winner makes the money and the loser doesn't. But somebody's still making the money. So Balanced Body, who won, you know, how many millions and millions of dollars have they made since this has ended? And that's because he wanted to do all this different types of equipment and not be restricted. Okay. And he said supposedly saved the Pilates, saved Pilates for the community. Well, we're in the state we're in today where you can do a weekend, a day, a couple hour workshop and become a certified Pilates teacher because of Balanced Body and losing the trademark. And they tried to scare everybody back then. If we'd had social media back then, it wouldn't necessarily been as bad, because they scared everybody saying you're not going to be able to use the name Pilates, and you're not going to be able. Well, it wasn't that you couldn't use the name Pilates; you weren't going to be able to teach what you did because I was restricted the name. But the reality would have been, right? There's McDonald's, and then there's Burger King, and then there's Wendy's, and all these other things. So everybody, the difference was, if I'd have won, when you walked into a Pilates studio, you were going to be assured that you were going to get the same thing, that you got in Joe's studio, and the way Ramona passed it on from them and archives and everything like that. Now, when you walk into a studio that says Pilates, you have no idea necessarily what you're going to get. That's the difference.
Então, ele está falando ali que a batalha de um trademark é assim, né? Sempre beneficia quem ganha, sempre tem um lado. Alguém sempre ganha, o outro perde. Então, o que ganha acaba gerando muito dinheiro, né? E ele diz que, né, com a Balanced Body, né, eles acabaram ganhando, e foi justamente para poder produzir equipamentos diferentes da forma que eles queriam e usar o nome Pilates para todo mundo. E eles acabaram até usando como se fosse, as pessoas ficaram assustadas, porque eles não iriam poder usar o nome Pilates para poder dar aula de Pilates, né? E então a Balance Bar acabou usando esse argumento para conseguir, né, com que eles usassem, vencessem isso, né? E, de certa forma, não é isso que ele queria que as pessoas entrassem no estúdio de Pilates e fossem aprender Pilates, como o Joe ensinou, como a Romana ensinava, como estão nos arquivos, nos documentos. E, hoje em dia, a gente pode chegar no estúdio de Pilates e simplesmente não aprender nada, né, relacionado com isso. Então, trademark sempre tem algo assim, brigas, né? Ele comentou sobre o McDonald's, Burger King. São marcas diferentes, mas por mais que acabam fazendo a mesma coisa, né?
Exato. Eu tenho uma pergunta do Alisson.
Do Alisson.
Isso, você pode, para mim não falar, tá?
Ok.
É grande.
Okay, Sean, we have a question from one of our friends. He's saying that about the springs, Joe created the first reformer with weights. And the weights and the cords, and looks like in New York City in 1927. Oh, and then in 27 he showed up with the springs.
No, that's not true.
No, so can you talk about that, please?
Sure. There is a picture that was from Germany before he came here, showing him with the reformer that had springs. It did not have straps, but it had springs. And he also, I have the blueprint from that reformer. So it was before he came to New York that he had that, and it had 7 springs. When he came to New York, he took it down to 4 because it's clear that you don't need that many springs, and he found the right amount. So yes, he started with something in the very beginning, but fairly quickly he went to 4, and it stayed at 4 and 3 gears for, from when he came to New York to when he died. So when somebody says he did that in 1927, well, first of all, he came in 25, opened in 26, and that's when he had those reformers. And he never, there is no picture. There's the one, what I think he's talking about is the patent. Right, there's a patent for the reformer that he patented that looked like it has weight, but what he actually had didn't do any of that. So, and why, I don't know. I can't tell you why, but there's a picture of a reformer that was from Germany, advertising his reformer in Germany before he came here. So at least 1924, Maybe, I'm not sure, 20, whenever he came. So he tried to do it there, and then he brought it here.
Então, ele está falando que não é preciso, né, essa data, porque a patente foi feita, sim, desse reformer com o peso, mas ele nunca acabou desenvolvendo, né, e diz que tem, sim, documentos que o primeiro reformer foi feito na Alemanha e tinha 7 molas, e ele acabou trazendo esse reformer, que estava tentando trazer o reformer para cá, ele veio em 25, mas em 24 ele já estava tentando trazer para cá. E quando ele abriu o estúdio em 26, o reformer abaixou para 4 molas. Aí, no caso.
Yeah, there's a lot of stories about what Joe did that it's clear he didn't. When you look at the archives, and it's kind of, to me, what happens is somebody, and Joe may have even started some of these stories. When you look at some of the articles, when I first started doing Pilates, Romana said these things, I believed it, and then Javier wrote his book, and he went and did the research and said, no, he's not, descendant from Pontius Pilates. Which one article, he says that to one writer in an article. Pontius Pilates in old Greek time, religious, the one who persecuted Jesus Christ, that guy. So he said he was a descendant of his. That, Javier, proved that to be false. But back in those days, there was no internet. There was no way to go and find these things out. So if somebody said that to a reporter, the reporter would write it, and that's what happened. So Joe even, he created some of his own bending of reality to promote and market himself.
Então ele está falando que tem muitas histórias, né, que eram passadas para frente porque o Joe criou essas histórias, né? E na realidade que ele criou, né? Ele falava que ele era descendente do Pilates, que, né, lá da parte religiosa lá, e na verdade quando e a Romana acabava falando isso, né? E quando o Javier foi fazer aquela pesquisa toda pro livro dele, aí tudo mudou, porque o Javier foi atrás, né? Foi feita uma busca e descobriu que ele não tinha nenhuma descendência, né? Do nome Pilates ter vindo daí. E o Sean também falou que ele tem o blueprints, né, que são a parte dos arquivos do Reforma da época lá de 25, quando o primeiro Reforma veio.
Legal. E sobre antes de você, Nathaniel, a pergunta do Alan, para resumir ali, eu acho que ele entende que Joseph conheceu o trabalho com pesos, porque a gente via fotos de pesos no estúdio de Joe, né? Porque meio que esse trabalho de peso meio que foi abandonado e o trabalho da mola se tornou único, né? Vamos dizer assim. A gente via várias fotos de Joe com pesos no estúdio, né? Tinha muitas fotos de pesos, porque esse trabalho com pesos nunca foi adicionado, se ele sabe alguma coisa sobre isso.
Okay, so they're asking about the work with the free weights. Like they seen a lot of pictures that Joe had free weights in his studio, and someone wrote here about kettlebells and that kind of stuff. So why that got lost through the method?
So what free weights? I mean, what he had a bar with a couple weights on it that was maybe 10 pounds, right? That was to give you a little stretch. It wasn't to do strength training. And if and when you read his writings, he says, that we don't use medicine balls, which are weighted balls. We don't use those type of things. That's not Pilates. That's not, well, he didn't say Pilates. He says that's not contrology. So when somebody says the free weights, there was no kettlebells. There was no bowling pin things that the Indians brought over. It came from India. I forget what they're called, but they look like bowling pins. So there's all those things. Joe didn't use those things. He had invented his own apparatus to do exercise. There's the tensometer with the thing that had the compression spring that you squeeze together. That eventually became what the magic circle did instead. Okay. So when you look at the weights, yeah, he did use weights. There was hand weights. And how many pounds was that? 2, 3?
Mm-hmm.
And then he used a little bar with weights on it, and I have those weights. They're like 2.5 pounds each, and there's 4 of them, so it's what, 10 pounds. So yes, they use weights, but it's not the way people use kettlebells. I mean, what does somebody do with kettlebells? They have all these huge weights and they're doing all this swinging and all that. That's not what Joe did at all.
Yeah.
Ok, então ele disse que, na verdade, ele até tem essas barras, né, de peso do Joe, e, na verdade, eram pesos leves, ele falou 2,5 pounds, então isso é 1 quilo e pouquinho, né, em quilos. E ele disse que era usado para fazer alongamentos, né, não para trabalhar força em si. E até no caso o tensometer, que ele fala, que é a mola, né, fechando, começou com isso e depois virou o Magic Circle. Então ele sempre tentava trabalhar com a resistência, mas com algo mais leve, né, não dos pesos. Ele não sabe que fotos são essas que vocês estão falando, é o que eu entendi.
Sim. Nathanael, tem até a questão do neck stretch, né? O neck stretch não tem uma mola mais leve? Algo assim, Nathanael? Não? Você que...
Sim. O Magic Circle também, né? Se tem um porquê de ser tão leve e o que é que ele acredita que diferencia, porque hoje em dia você usa um neck é muito mais pesado, né?
Okay, so talking about the weight of the springs, like the neck stretcher, Joe's original one, it is much lighter than the ones that we see these days. And why is that difference? The springs were much lighter, like the Magic Circle we see at the pillow. The Magic Circle, like with band, is super light. I personally love that, but why is that difference?
Well, again, you have people who want to bring into Pilates weight training. That's not Pilates.
Yeah.
Right? That's not what he did. And so it's not about getting more and more weight and stronger. It's about connecting, from the toe to the powerhouse. And if you have too much weight, you can't get to the powerhouse because you get stuck where the toe is, right? Because you can't get past that spring. So his springs are very little, but it allows you to do the function, and then you include that function into the rest of the system. Or if somebody has a problem with their toes, you can be specific about an injury, but that's not, it's not about getting super strong with, like I see these toe stretchers and the finger stretchers with these big fat springs now, you can barely move them. Well, that's not how Joe did it. Same with the reformer. It's like, you want to make the spring so hard that you can, and his springs tend to be a little bit firmer than most. Because when I got his reformer, I got his springs. So I reproduced those springs. I took them to a spring manufacturer. We measured everything. We made sure, to get everything right. And then they reproduced those springs. So it really is, for the powerhouse and the extremities, you want a little stronger spring. But when you're out at the end of the extremities or you're doing your neck, it wasn't that way. And what most people don't realize is that with the neck stretcher, he had 2 different springs. I have an archival picture where you literally see he's doing the neck stretcher, and there's one spring that he's using, and there's another one that's dangling. So obviously he was able to switch the spring. So you were able to get a little bit stronger. So that may be why the neck stretcher has a stronger one and a lighter one, so you could progress. You could do that with the neck stretcher when somebody got stronger. But he didn't have bigger and bigger and bigger springs. And what I see today is that a lot of people will add 2 springs to the neck stretcher to do an exercise. That's nowhere in the archives. Now, those 2 springs doing head exercises with a head strap is done. So what's happened is people that have been teaching that, some of the elder people are mixing up, and they remember this and they remember that, and they combine the 2 and they think that's it. But why have 2 big springs and then this little tiny spring? Like, what's the purpose? And the only purpose is that little tiny spring is too hard to move. The bigger springs are easier, so you start with that and then you try to go in, but it doesn't make any sense the way Joe taught it.
I agree.
Yes, então sobre as molas, né? That's all right. I wrote it down. Vamos see. Na verdade, as molas mais leves são para que o movimento seja funcional e seja feito, né? Se a mola é muito pesada, igual hoje em dia tem nos toes correctors por aí, uma mola bem grande, mais grossa, é difícil de mexer os dedos, né? Então você acaba não utilizando o propósito que o Joe tinha criado, né? Que era para mexer os dedos dos pés, acaba utilizando outro músculo.
O princípio era conectar. O princípio das molas mais leves era se conectar, né?
Isso, conectar o que você estava com o powerhouse, né? Ele até falou isso, bastante do powerhouse. Então, se a mola é mais forte, você tem essa conexão com o powerhouse. Se você, ele até comentou das molas do Reformer daí, que são um pouquinho mais firmes. Mas se você fizer uma mola de reforma muito firme, você vai acabar trabalhando de outra forma. E ele reproduziu essas molas do Reformer do Joseph e fez a réplica, né? E sim, ela é um pouco mais firme, mas então, quando as molas são maiores e mais firmes, é para trabalhar mais o centro e o powerhouse. E quando as molas são menores, é para trabalhar mais as extremidades. Aí vem a parte do neck stretcher, que tinha sim duas molas. Tinha uma mola mais leve e uma mais pesada. Então, você poderia progredir. Ele viu isso nos arcados, tem como provar. E ele disse também que só era usado o neck stretcher com uma mola. Hoje em dia já se viu que algum elder implementou duas molas para ser usado no neck stretcher e ele não entende o porquê fazer isso, porque daí são duas molas grandes com uma mola menor. Então, talvez pode perder um pouco a funcionalidade que o Joe queria.
Sim. Ele disse que as molas do neck stretcher podiam ser trocadas, é isso?
Isso, é isso que eu entendi. So, he's asking Sean that you mentioned that the neck stretcher spring could be interchangeable for a stronger
one was a little bit stronger. They were same size. He also had a heavy and a light arm spring and leg spring.
Oh, right.
So he had heavy and light, but he didn't have it wasn't like 5 different versions and you did all these different things, what you see today. And you would start with, if you had somebody weaker, you would start with light because there are people who are weaker. Yeah. And then as they got stronger, you could progress them. Or if, you get a 5'2" female that weighs 90 pounds, however many kilos that is, 45 kilos or something. And then you have, a guy come in and he's 6'2" and weighs 200 pounds. You do have to, there is variability within the system.
Então, ele disse sim que as molas podiam ser trocadas, né? Tinha a mais pesada e a mais grossa, e no caso, a mais pesada e a mais leve, desculpa. E sim, porque se vem uma pessoa mais fraca ou uma pessoa menor, ele comentou uma mulher de, vamos dizer, 1,50 m e com 45 quilos por aí, vai precisar de uma mola mais leve. E uma pessoa de 1,90 m e poucos, um rapaz que seja de 100 quilos, vai precisar usar algo mais pesado para poder sentir o trabalho. Ele até comentou também que tinham mais molas, por exemplo, o arm springs e as leg springs também tinham 2 pesos diferentes. Mas era só isso, era algo mais limitado, não era tanto de opções que a gente vê hoje em dia.
Sim. Nathanael, eu sei que você vai perguntar, mas vou fechar 2 perguntas aqui, que tem mais 2 perguntas, e aí a gente vai para os finalmente, tá? Carol, tem 2 perguntas aqui para ele, depois o Nathanael, a gente vai para a reta final, já tem 1h30 aqui. Eu vou perguntar do Alan primeiro, depois eu volto para a Júlia, porque tem a relação com aparelhos e tudo mais, né? O que é o símbolo das solas de ferro aí na camiseta? Significavam para Joe. Ele fala Jan Andrews. Pergunte a ele, por favor.
Okay, so he's asking about the Pilates Source logo that is using the iron shoes. What does it mean, the meaning of that? And he also mentioned a student, Jerome Andrews, who was one of the Joe's students from the 1940s.
And that
a friend. Yeah. And he used to do the rollover using the iron shoe.
Okay, well, there's a whole, in the archives, there's a whole workout using the iron shoe. Okay, and it is similar to the map, but it's still different because you did things slightly differently with the iron shoe. I have, and he had different iron shoes. He had a heavy and a light iron shoe, and the metal was different. One looks like it was really iron. The other one might be some sort of alloy, like more of aluminum or something. And then they also had inserts that would slide and sit and fit into that, so you could add weight if you needed to. All right. And then I think when he made the ballet slippers, I think he used the insert to make those instead of the true iron shoe. So there's different variations that he did. As far as so Jerome, I mean, obviously he trained with Joe. There's a lot of different people, and you have to remember. You want to say that first, and then I can add to it?
Yes, sure. Thank you. Então, ele diz que nos arquivos aparece sim essa sequência da sola de ferro, né, do Iron Shoe, que parece muito com a sequência do Matt. Então, várias coisas são possíveis fazer igual era feito no Matt, com algumas diferenças. E esses Iron Shoes, eles tinham pesos diferentes também. Tinha um que era sólido de ferro, e tinha outro que era mais de alumínio, um pouco mais leve. E também tinha como colocar como se fosse uma palmilha, para ficar mais pesado ou mudar o peso também disso. Ele até comparou que é como se fosse uma sapatilha também, igual de dançarino.
Carol, antes dele concluir, aproveite e já pergunta se nos arquivos é verdade que o nome desse material também está lá como sapatilha da Cinderela. Se tem alguma coisa assim.
Okay, that sounds like a joke, Sean, but here it comes. He's saying that he wants to ask before you do the conclusion of that question, that if there is anything documentary that it says that the Iron Shoe was also known as the Cinderella shoe.
Yeah, there's a writing about that called the Cinderella shoe. So there is a little a piece of paper that talks about the Cinderella shoe, and I believe it's in an article as well somewhere. I'd have to go and check, but I think so. Mm-hmm. So here the thing to understand, right, with Jerome or any other person, mm-hmm. If you come to me or somebody goes to you, right, any teachers, yeah, and you really give them a session based on what they need, mm-hmm. Did you teach them Pilates? Yeah. You taught them the part of Pilates that they needed. So if somebody does things differently, Joe may have given him that because his particular body needed that. That doesn't mean everybody needs that necessarily exercise. What he documented, remember, this is what I'm saying, his life work, he documented what was the most important, and he had an order and a sequence and a way to do things, and there were slight changes, but that doesn't mean there was other variations, but that you don't teach that to everybody because that's not the way the system was designed. Mm-hmm. And so if somebody is teaching what Joe taught them, they're teaching their Pilates that he gave them, but they're not teaching Pilates as a whole. They're just giving that small little piece. And for certain people, that may be very beneficial. Look, all this contemporary stuff that's out there, it might be very good. I don't know. I don't really care because I've done Joe's work for 30 years and it works. So I don't need to go do all that stuff. I'm a physical therapist. I'm a Feldenkrais practitioner. When somebody comes to me for PT, I do a lot of things before they go to Pilates to get them ready. But then I finish them with Pilates and hopefully they stay and they continue to do Pilates, right? That's the goal, because if you have an injury, why'd you get the injury? The injury is going to heal. So whether you come to me or not, you're going to get better. What really needs to happen is, if it wasn't an accident, why'd you have that injury? That's what Pilates can really do something about.
If you need just you need is enough.
That's it.
You don't need more than you need.
True. Então, é realmente o que você precisa, né? Então, citando o exemplo do Jerome, né, que ele até mencionou que eles eram amigos, né? Não eram só alunos. Ele estudava, sim, com o Joseph, mas também eram amigos. E a Erika, thank you, Erika. Ele foi documentado, sim, parte, né, do que podia ser feito com o Iron Shoe, por exemplo, porque o Jerome precisava daquele exercício em si, né? Mas isso não quer dizer que não tem outras partes, né, que poderiam ser usadas. Então, quando a gente pensa em Pilates, que uma pessoa que fez Pilates traz, né, é só uma parte, não é o Pilates inteiro, porque é o que aquele corpo estava precisando ser usado, né? E ele até mencionou do Pilates contemporâneo, que tem muita coisa lá fora que pode até ser muito bem benefício. Um benefício, ele não sabe, ele não estuda isso, ele estuda o trabalho tradicional do Joseph, mas o que esses outros professores aprenderam, que foi para o corpo deles e implementaram para os outros, também pode ser bom, né? Mas o que tem que ver é que tem variações, sim, mas que nem todo mundo vai aprender o Pilates inteiro, né? Só partes. Aí ele comentou também sobre, por exemplo, ele associa muito Pilates à fisioterapia, né? Porque ele é um fisioterapeuta, então uma pessoa vem com uma lesão para ele, e ele vai levar para a fisioterapia primeiro, trabalhar a lesão e preparando para o Pilates, acreditando que depois a pessoa vai dar continuidade ao trabalho através do Pilates, porque mesmo fazendo Pilates ou não, a lesão iria acabar se curando, né? Mas com o Pilates, você pode entender por que você tem essas lesões e como prevenir.
Ele disse uma coisa bem interessante sobre... Joseph deixou documentado, né, o que é para todo mundo, assim, está aberto, vamos dizer assim, o essencial, né? Então, aquilo, se você fizer o essencial para aquilo que seu corpo precisa, já é suficiente, né? A gente não precisa ficar pensando em várias outras variações e aparelhos e acessórios e tudo mais. Se você fizer aquilo, fica documentado, só aquilo funciona. O que você precisa, aquilo já funciona, já é o bastante, né?
Isso.
Como a gente tinha falado. E a última pergunta aqui que eu tenho do pessoal, nos anos 70, 90, a Romana dava aula sem sistema ainda definido, e essa coisa do sistema definido foi depois que ela se juntou com o Sean.
Okay, Sean, they're asking that, like, before you met Romana around the 70s and 90s, while she was teaching, before you came, did she teach the method, like, using that separation of the method already, or is that just started once on the 90s, once you got with her? Like the basic, intermediate, and
that came pretty much, they would still, again, you didn't walk into Joe's studio and start with control balance, the snake twist. So there was a progression, and you would start people with a basic exercise, basic exercises. So when we went to go do the training and do the manual and make something that we could teach, that was part of it. Well, where are the basic things? And there was a card in the studio, and it would say, what you would start with, and then you progress. But as far as teaching, the training, that was part. That's when when we did the manual was basic, intermediate, advanced. That's how that really started to be taught that way. And she would, and I left it up to her. She was the master. I was not. I knew physical therapy and other things, but I over the years I learned with her. I spent 13 years working with her, developing and progressing and trying to take Pilates international and do the thing, make it happen. And every year we would meet, and not just Rahman and I, but all the training centers. So people, all the training centers from around the country and around the world would come together, and we'd sit down and we'd say, okay, what worked? What didn't? What did we change? When I first started the Pilates training, you didn't need any prerequisite hours. You could just come and do Pilates. Well, that didn't work. Because you had people you had people that had been training for years and knew what they're doing. And you had other people who had no idea. And, the training is not to teach you Pilates. The training is to teach you how to teach Pilates, which is a much different thing.
Okay. So do you think that previously she was doing that, even that she didn't documentary that?
Well, I think that there was probably some of that, but it was not codified the way we codified it for the training.
Got it. Thank you. Então, ele diz que, por mais que ela estivesse provavelmente ensinando, né, como ele remeteu de novo, uma pessoa nova vem no estúdio, não vai fazer um control balance, não vai fazer um snake twist nas primeiras aulas, né? Então, ele acredita, sim, que ela já estava trabalhando dessa forma, preparando o corpo, né, para chegar lá, mas não era codificado ainda, né? Foi a partir da época que ele juntou com ela que aí eles codificaram isso. E ele até mencionou que eles faziam encontros com os outros estúdios, né, que foi indo ao redor do mundo, anual, se juntavam e falavam, tá, agora vamos ver o que está funcionando, o que funciona. Uma pessoa vem que nunca fez Pilates, mas quer virar um instrutor, então vai fazer, mas não tem nenhuma base, não funcionou, não deu certo. Então eles entenderam que precisava já ter uma base de Pilates para poder fazer o treinamento de Pilates, porque uma coisa é você estar aprendendo para ensinar Pilates para os outros, né? Que é isso que um programa de certificação faz, não é só ensinar Pilates, é para ensinar como dar aula de Pilates.
You know, part of what happens is it's a book, and some people think it's a Bible, and it's not. It's a guide. That's it.
Ele disse que, na verdade, é um livro, né? O manual é um livro e é para guiar, né? Não é uma Bíblia, é para ser guiado.
Exato. Nathanael? Suas.
As finais. São duas perguntinhas. Uma é se o livro dos arquivos, que ele lançou com a Romana e tudo mais, e enfim, não teve uma nova edição, se ele pretende relançar, e se ele poderia falar, se ele tem algum arquivo, algum detalhe sobre um equipamento chamado pirâmide. Ou, se não tiver se ele podia falar sobre o equipamento que ele tem registros de um equipamento de treino de boxe.
Okay, all right. First question.
I saw it. He said two, and then we went to one.
Yeah, right.
So the first one, it is about the book, the archival book that you launched years ago. Are you planning to relaunch that?
I am. You know, part of the problem has been, you know, that's probably maybe 5 to 10% of what I have. And the problem is that it's been abused. I mean, people have scanned it, copied it, put it all over the internet. I'm playing whack-a-mole all the time, trying to get, you know, asking people, please don't post that. It's copyrighted. It's a copy of copyrighted pictures. So what I've been doing is the new one will have a lot of more protections in it. They'll have, you know, watermarks and digimarks and all sorts of things to try to prevent that abuse. And I understand why people do it, but at the same time, it's, you know, it doesn't make me want to bring anything else out, because if people are going to abuse it, then, you know, I'm not really interested in doing it. It's pretty basic and simple.
Yeah.
Ele falou que é simples, né? Porque, na verdade, isso seria 5 a 10% do trabalho que ele tem e dos arquivos, e, na verdade, foi muito abusado já. Né? O primeiro livro já foi escaneado, já foi reproduzido as fotos, e quando ele vê fotos por aí, ele pede para as pessoas não divulgarem a foto dessa forma, porque tem um trademark nessa foto, né? Tem o copyright que a gente fala em português, então não deveria ser assim. O próximo livro, sim, ele está planejando em lançar, vai ter marca d'água para prevenir esse abuso. Ele falou que é um abuso do livro, né? Mas que ele não tem muita vontade de fazer porque as pessoas não respeitam.
And
a segunda pergunta.
One of the things that I'm going to be doing is also making every picture that's in the book available to be able to purchase, so you can put it on the wall.
Oh, cool! That's awesome. Então ele falou que uma coisa que ele está trabalhando é que ele, para lançar essas fotos, para que você possa imprimir e pôr na parede daí. Então você compra a foto em si, daí você imprime e põe na parede. É bacana.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, now second question.
Okay.
Is if you have any documents or if you ever heard about apparatus or equipment called pyramid.
The pyramid.
Pyramid.
Okay, so let me put it to you this way. You sent me some questions. That was one of the questions. And guess what? That's the first time I ever heard of it.
Okay.
So that kind of answers your question, doesn't it?
All right. You don't have
I don't even know what it is. I have
Okay.
no idea. You know, maybe one of the pieces of apparatus that somebody's just named for that reason. I don't know, but I've never heard that name used. I don't know what it is. So maybe whoever says that that's an apparatus they knew or Joe had, show me the picture. You know, what is it? And otherwise, to me, it's just another story. And there's plenty of stories out there. And people make stuff up all the time. But maybe it's true. I don't know. I can tell you that it's the first time I've heard of it. So now I'm kind of interested. It's like, okay, well, what is that? What's that supposed to do? And let me see if it's in any of the pictures, because I have lots and lots of pictures. So if it was something he had in the studio, I should be able to find it. But I don't know what it is I'm looking for. So.
Então ele está dizendo que esse equipamento pirâmide ele nunca ouviu falar. Na verdade, hoje é a primeira vez que ele está ouvindo falar. A gente tinha conversado sobre essa pergunta antes, mas ele nunca ouviu falar antes. E no caso, se é algo que alguém viu por aí, ele gostaria de ver uma foto, porque nos arquivos dele não tem nada que seja similar, né? E na verdade, se ele for buscar, ele nem sabe o que ele está buscando. E ele acredita que seja mais uma história, então, que esteja acontecendo por aí.
Eu posso estar equivocado, mas, se eu não me engano, foi citado no livro de Javier, e que esse equipamento, no incêndio que teve, ele pegou fogo, e que o Jay agradeceu pelo equipamento ter sido destruído, porque o Jay não gostava de treinar com esse aparelho. É isso que tem só citado, assim, e que o nome seria Pirâmide. Aí eu, enfim, gostaria de saber se tem alguma informação mais. Só tem isso no livro do Javier, lá pro final.
Okay, so
Javier and Jay is in there somewhere.
I'm sorry, you got something?
I think I heard Javier and Jay as well. So
exactly. You see, you know the names. Very good. He's mentioned that he might be mistaken, but he did read on Javier's biography about Joe. In the end, probably it was mentioning that this pyramid was in the original studio before the fire happened there. And Jay used to use that, and he was like happy that the thing was burned in ashes because he didn't have to use anymore. Okay. I don't know if it's just a joke.
First of all, you know, at the studio, when you came to the studio, there was a book that you had to sign in and put your address and your phone number so they could contact you, and everybody had to do that. And it was also dated. And I have those books. And Jay signed the book after Joe died. So there, you know, so whether he was there or not, I can't tell you, but the documents say that he wasn't there until after Joe passed away. So when you're talking about the fire and him and all that stuff, again, is it a story? I don't know. I can tell you what documents I have, and that's one of the documents that says that he wasn't there before that. All the elders were there. They're all signed in the book. Romana signed it a number of times because she would move, and every time she moved, she had to put her new address and if the phone number changed. So that's what you did. That's how you did it. You would have little cards that you would do for your workout, but everybody signed that, you know, just about everybody signed that book as far as I know. That's how they kept track of you. So, you know, when I hear these stories, I have to take that with a grain of salt because I don't know, was he really there? I mean, we know he was there for sure with Clara and Romana, but was he there before Joe? I just don't. That's not what the studio records show. I know people don't like to hear that, but you know, there's a document, and you know, there's a lot of money to be made to say that you study with Joe.
Ok, ele está falando que talvez seja mais uma história, ele não sabe, talvez as pessoas não gostam de ouvir, né? Mas ele comentou que nos arquivos que ele tem dos livros, quando você chegava na porta do estúdio, tinha um livro que você tinha que assinar seu nome e a sua presença e era datado. E, por exemplo, a Romana, como ela mudou várias vezes e voltava para o estúdio cada vez, ela reassinava e colocava o endereço novo. E então não aparece o nome do Jay até a morte do Joseph. Começou a aparecer depois da morte do Joseph. Então, se tinha esse aparelho antes, né, o incêndio foi antes da morte do Joseph, então ele não sabe do que se trata.
Okay.
No, I mean, Jay has said that the archives are Joe's garbage. He said that he took, you know, the things that he took to Beckett were the things that, you know, he didn't want. Well, why would you take the time to travel 3 hours and bring equipment to your new studio that you didn't want? So, you know, to me, you know, you're looking at somebody who the archives tell the story without bias or lack of memory or any of those other things. And, you know, 40 years ago, what do you really remember? Well, the documents they don't lie, right?
Mm-hmm.
They are what they are. So I can only tell you what what I have and what I see. But when I hear somebody saying, "Well, that stuff's garbage," well,
Mm-hmm.
it's garbage because it may make the stories you're telling not so truthful or accurate. Let's put it, but more likely. I'm not going to say he's lying, but it's not as accurate. Let's say that.
Ok.
Então, ele mencionou que, desculpa, que os arquivos são as histórias, né, que podem provar, documentos podem provar. E foi dito que os aparelhos que estavam perdidos era como se fosse um monte de lixo, vamos dizer assim, porque o Joe não queria usar isso, mas como que o Joe não queria usar isso, sendo que ele dirigia por 3 horas, né, toda semana e trabalhava nesses equipamentos, né? Então é meio controverso, né? Essa história. Então ele diz que ele entende o que pode ser comprovado, né? Nos arquivos é isso que ele acredita.
Uhum. Deve pegar alguma coisa ali.
Vamos ver, vamos mostrar. E eu vi que a Florence falou ali, né?
Porque hoje teve um encontro, um workshop online com o Jay, né? E a Florence disse que o Jay falou hoje que não estava lá quando isso ainda aconteceu. Só para...
Eu queria, se eu puder, Fernando e Natanael,
claro,
voltar na parte ali do equipamento, que ele fala pra gente a questão do padding no equipamento, quando tem muita espuma no equipamento. Eu fiquei surpresa que ele não mencionou também, que o equipamento do Joe é mais sólido, mais firme, né? E hoje em dia tem uns que são bem mais móveis,
macios, né?
Macios, isso. E acaba, né, muda o trabalho um pouco, né?
Sorry.
No
That's
problem.
right. Okay, so I'd like to complement a previously question, Sean, about the equipment.
Okay.
I remember
first.
Yeah.
I'll tell you something. So this isn't the book with Jay's writing in it, but just to give you an idea. So it has the date, has the day, has the name, and has the amount that they paid. And there's different ones that there's that, and then there's also books that has everybody's address as well. So there's all sorts of documentation that sort of shows you that.
Yes. Então ele está mostrando o livro, né? Um dos livros que estava lá no estúdio quando você chegava, anotava seu nome e a data, e também tem os livros também que você anotava seu endereço e tudo mais.
So I have books from the 20s all the way into the 80s.
Oh, nice.
Então ele tem livros, né? Desde the 80s, you said, Sean. I'm sorry.
Oh, yes, the 80s. Sorry.
Yeah, you're little.
I'm sorry. I was like, I moved it out of the way to go get the book.
That's okay. Então ele falou que ele tem os livros, né, desde os anos 80, então guardados, né? Sean, so about the equipment, I remember that in one of our conferences at the Pillow, you mentioned also about the padding on the equipment.
Yeah.
From Joe's equipment, it was more solid, maybe no padding at all on the small barrel kind of. How is the difference from the equipment today, that they're much more soft? And how is that changed?
Again, when you change that, you change a lot of things. If you're supposed to articulate and feel the spine, and you have too much padding, it's very difficult to do that. Okay. Yeah. So when you look at, you have the bench mat in the background, I see, and it's very firm.
My baby.
It's very firm. And Joe, I've had there's 3 different bench mats. One of the ones, it was repurposed to make into a massage table that was in the studio in Beckett. So obviously took an old bench mat and made another table out of it. And he didn't have foam. He had jute. And that's what they used to use for upholstery. It was like fibers, and it was and it's not that thick, but it gave you a little bit of cushion, right? So it wasn't a hard thing. So there was not a lot of extra foam. And nowadays I see these like people with foam that's like this big, an inch and a half, 2 inches foam on these apparatus. It's not gonna. It just doesn't do the same thing. You don't get the feedback, right? It's too squishy. Part of this, the workout when you're using the different apparatus, it's not just the springs. It's, the mat, the reformer, everything. That's information into your body. And if you take that information away by putting too much foam in, you have less information, so it's not as clear. So Joe wanted you to feel, and it's not necessarily super comfortable.
Yeah.
Nowadays, everybody wants to be, I feel pressure here. I feel pressure. So like, think of the shoulder blocks, right?
Yeah.
How many people in the world today have so much stress that these muscles here are like this all the time, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you push that against your shoulder block and they go, oh, that hurts.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Right? Because you want to release those muscles. The shoulder block's there to release the muscles.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
you should also know how to use your powerhouse so that you don't put all your weight into there. But again, it's not like it's a bad thing necessarily. And it's padded. But if you need more padding, you put more padding. But, that's not for everybody. His studio, he had all these pads. So if somebody was bony and it was painful, you could add a pad. You don't just put 2 inches of foam on that so everybody gets that, because everybody doesn't need that.
Yeah.
Então, ele está falando sim que os aparelhos de Joe eram mais firmes, mais sólidos, né? Ele até comentou do benchmat que eu tenho aqui, ele é mais firme do que um Cadillac ou um Max normal que a gente vê, e é justamente para que a articulação aconteça, né? Que esse feedback, o aparelho te devolva, né, o que você precisa ali nisso. E se tiver uma espuma muito grande, vai atrapalhar no trabalho, com certeza. E por mais que algumas pessoas precisam de um pouco mais de espuma, ele comentou agora do shoulder blocks, das ombreiras, que hoje em dia a maioria de nós, a gente carrega muito estresse nos ombros. Então, quando a gente deita no reforma e vai puxar o carrinho, sente aquela pressão, né, e dói. Então, isso é uma coisa até boa, porque isso vai começar a fazer que ela soltar, né, essa musculatura ali. E se precisar, coloca um pad ali, né, daqueles outros pads menores, né, que a gente usa, sticky pad, ou não sei como vocês falam em português, mas aí isso seria para aquela pessoa, e não que todas as pessoas têm que usar a espuma maior.
E se você usar mais o centro, a
isso,
pressão do ombro diminui bastante, né?
Isso, e se souber usar o powerhouse, não vai pressionar tanto o ombro, né?
So, I have a reformer that was built in the 80s. And it's got very little foam on it.
Well, right.
It just nowadays there's double the foam, and I have Gratz reformers built in the 90s, and it had very little foam on it. So, and foam was available in the 60s when Joe redid his studio and took it to aluminum. Right? That was in either probably 59, 60, 61, because there's pictures from the, I think, 58 or 59, and it's still the wood reformers. And then if you look at Chuck Rappaport's pictures for the Sports Illustrated magazine, it's now all metal reformers, right? So when he switched over, he had the opportunity. They had foam. He could have made the new ones with lots of foam. He didn't. He kept it the same way because that gave him what he wanted to do with the body, with the apparatus. So again, if you change the apparatus in any way, shape, or form, it changes the exercise, and it changes what the exercise does to the body. And Joe spent, and you read his writings, he says, I know, and I've seen with my clients, the changes that my apparatus and my work does. Well, if you're looking for those changes and you want that, and you have all this other apparatus that does all these other things, you're not going to get the same. Now, it may be it's similar. Look, Vermont always used to say, even the imitation Pilates or the new Pilates is still better than all the other stuff because it's still based on Joe's work. So it's still going to be beneficial, but are you going to get the same? No, it's not. It's just not the same. A firm surface and a really cushiony surface is going to do two totally different things to the body.
Yeah.
Então ele diz que sim, que faz uma diferença no corpo, né? Porque nos anos, ele tem um reformer dos anos 80, era bem mais firme, E então dá para se sentir muito mais. Ele tem um Doug Ross dos anos 90, era menos espuma. E ele entende que se o Joseph quisesse essa espuma, ele teria implementado, porque a espuma estava disponível já ali nos anos 60, e quando ele refez o estúdio e mudou os performers para alumínio, que tem fotos de 58, que ele ainda tinha os performers de madeira. Então, ali por 59, 60, ele deve ter arrumado, porque as fotos do Chuck Rappaport, foi ali no começo de 61, já estavam os reformers de alumínio. Então, se ele quisesse realmente, tivesse essa intenção, ele teria adicionado mais a espuma, né? E ele não adicionou. Então, ele entende que realmente muda o trabalho mais uma vez.
Eu queria agradecer ao Sean, Carol. Eu queria fazer uma última pergunta e agradecer a ele e a você pelo tempo aí. Chegamos a 2 horas de bate-papo aqui. E eu queria perguntar sobre o trabalho que ele está fazendo com a casa lá perto de Jacobsville, o que ele pretende fazer, a comunidade, ele tem pessoas ajudando na reforma e tudo mais da casa, qual é o futuro ali que ele pretende fazer com a casa, o museu, não sei, qual é o projeto?
Ok, eu gostaria de agradecer rapidinho por essa oportunidade, mais uma vez, de estar aqui com vocês, é sempre muito bacana e gratificante para mim, gente. Sean, he's saying that he would like to thank you for being here with us, he's very grateful, they're both. And he just wants to finish asking you about the Joe's property, how you're working on the property and how you what you want to do with the property now.
Okay, well, I bought the property in 1997 because I went to Jacob's Pillow. In the archives, there is a film and photographs of Ted Shawn and Barton Moomaw, who was his lover at the time. They were partners, and they were working out at the studio. And there's also the film of Joe teaching at the Pillow. And so I went to the Pillow and met Norton Owen, who's the archivist there. And I basically said, I have this stuff. Would you like to, I will loan it to you. And if you have anything, I figured we'd do a trade. I had a lot more than what he had, but it was still good. And when I was there, he said, well, his property's for sale. And it has all the equipment in it. I'm like, what? So I went to the realtor and I looked at the property and I said, I don't want the property, but I'll buy the equipment. And the realtor went to the owner and they came back and says, well, the owner says, if you want the equipment, you got to buy the property. So luckily I did, because his studio and his house had been left and had nothing done to it for almost 40 years. So the roofs were leaking. It was really in bad shape. And if it had been somebody else, they probably would have just torn it down. So over the last 20 some years, I've been, every summer I go up and I do a little bit of work. 3 years ago, I decided to do something different, and we did a GoFundMe. And I started doing Pilates work weekends and inviting people in the community to support and help, and also to come and do work. And so the studio is almost done now. It needs a paint job for the ceiling, and it needs to be trimmed, and the floor needs to be done, and it's done. And so that is going to be half museum and half working studio. And so that's the goal. Joe's dream was to have a training center in the Berkshires for people to come and learn contrology. And what we're doing at the Pillow is that we're not bringing the studio back to life. We're bringing his dream back to life as far as teaching and training people in the Berkshires. And now that the studio's done, I just did a webinar fundraiser yesterday, where we did two things. We did it was the weekend, this past weekend, this weekend was the weekend that we were supposed to do the Pillow. But because of the pandemic, we cannot. Am I going? I'm kind of going. You're writing it down, right?
Yes, I am writing. Okay. Go ahead. You're finished.
So we did it. We just did a fundraiser webinar where Elaine, Ewing, and I, and Elaine is the person who helps me the most with, she's intimately related to what I'm doing with Pillow and all these different things. And we did the standing mat, which is one of the webinars, the workshops we did at a previous Pillow. So we did part of that. I did a tour of the prop, what the property looked like when I first got it, and showed progression.
Yeah.
And she talked about the pillow, and then I started the first Joseph and Clara Pilates Awards this year. It was supposed to be at the Pillow, and since we couldn't do it, I decided to do it in this webinar. And I had a poll, and I asked people for different categories, and we had 6 different categories, and people were able to do all that and get recognized for all the work that they're doing. So that's sort of what I'm doing with the Pillow. And the next goal is that was a fundraiser to help redo their house, because the house is in the worst shape of all. The roof caved in. It's really, it needs to be rebuilt, not reconditioned. It needs to be it's a total rebuild job. It's going to be a lot of work.
Yeah.
Ok, I'm done. Sorry.
Então, de novo. Ok, então ele disse que a propriedade lá em Beckett, né, que é a 1 quilômetro do Jacobsville, ele comprou em 97, porque ele dava aula no Jacobsville, ainda dá, e por muitos anos, então ele conversava com o historiador de lá. Lá eles têm uma biblioteca, e esse historiador, Norton, né, que quem já entrou no Pilates College sabe, já viu, ele tem os arquivos de lá. Então eles começaram a trocar arquivos, né, entre eles, para se unir. E daí o Norton acabou falando, bom, você sabe que a propriedade do Joe está aqui à venda? E ele falou, não, como assim? Não sabia. E daí ele acabou indo procurar o vendedor da casa, da propriedade, e ele falou assim, olha, eu não quero comprar a propriedade, eu só quero os equipamentos que tem ali, né, que ele sabia que tinha equipamentos lá. Aí ele foi conversar com as pessoas que estavam vendendo, né, o vendedor, e daí a pessoa que estava vendendo falou, não, se você quer os equipamentos, tem que comprar tudo, a propriedade inteira. Então, ele acabou comprando, no que ele acha que foi algo muito bom, porque assim ele teve a oportunidade de resgatar muito a história do Joseph, porque possivelmente se fosse uma pessoa regular que comprasse essa propriedade, iria acabar simplesmente destruindo as casas, porque tanto o estúdio do Joseph e a casa do Joseph estavam assim abandonados há mais de 40 anos. E realmente não tem como usar a estrutura para nada, não teria como usar, então uma pessoa iria demolir completamente. Então, agora ele já refez a estrutura do estúdio, que é aquele em cima da pedra, né, que a gente vê, e tá bem bacana, só tem algumas coisas finais, que tem que acabar o chão e algumas coisas da janela, que ele falou, que tem que ser acabado, mas a intenção dele, sim, é fazer o sonho do Joseph ser realidade, né, Pilates para a comunidade, lá em Beckett, ensinando, né, como centro de treinamento e também tendo pessoas vindo fazer aula de Pilates lá, assim como poder ter a oportunidade de ver o museu, né, virar um museu também.
Sim, exato.
E aí ele fez esse fim de semana e outros fins de semana, né, esse ano inteiro ele está fazendo fundraisers, arrecadação, né, beneficente, para poder adquirir fundos tanto para o Jacobsville quanto para as obras lá em Beckett. E a primeira vez que ele teve essa ideia de reconstruir o estúdio Joseph, ele começou com essas arrecadações da comunidade de Pilates. E muitos professores foram lá também ajudar e trabalhar com ele. Então, praticamente um trabalho assim, né, que está acontecendo de formiguinha. E agora ele comentou que esse fim de semana a gente teve uma atividade lá que era para a gente estar no Jacobsville, né, fisicamente. Mais uma vez, por causa da pandemia, foi cancelado. E ele lançou o Awards, o prêmio do Joe e da Clara, que era para poder reconhecer alguns professores que estão na comunidade atuando com um trabalho tradicional. Foi bem bacana.
Legal, legal. Grace pergunta se a gente pode deixar essa live gravada no YouTube e no Facebook, para as pessoas poderem assistir, que não teve presente. Carol, por favor.
Ok. Sean, Fernando is asking if is that all right if he saved the live on the YouTube and Facebook so people can hit the replay later on?
Sure.
People that couldn't see it.
Fine. That's not a problem.
Yeah.
The more people that understand and see what we're doing, the better.
Yeah.
I when I had the trademark, I worried about what people did. I no longer worry about that. I'm just focused on what I have and trying to make sure that Joe's work, the way he wanted it done, is here for generations to come. Not just, and when it gets so spread out the way it's getting, it just disappears eventually.
Yeah.
So this is, I think, I'm going to focus on doing Joe's work, and if people, and we're the source, and if you want that, we're the, there's a place to go, and that's what Joe wanted. And I hopefully eventually, after we get the house redone, then what I want to do is build a bigger studio, and so that we can do certifications and trainings, because on the property there's a foundation made of cinder blocks that's fairly big that never got finished. Right, so it never got finished, but so I know that he was working on that. It just never got done. So that's the progression, is to be able to be the source, because New York City, it's not the same, and that's what he wanted. He wanted to do it in Beckett, and that's the goal. And so you're all invited.
Yeah.
Thank you. Então ele diz que sim, pode deixar a live salva. Ele acha que é importante, quanto mais pessoas ouvirem, né, sobre o que ele está falando também, aprender melhor. Ele quer que aconteça isso, e lá no estúdio em Beckett, ele até mencionou, esqueci de falar na outra parte, que ele está tentando, a próximo passo seria reconstruir a casa do Joseph também, que também está destruída, e do lado lá tem uma fundação já, a gente viu, tem como se fosse o cimento feito lá no chão já, então que na época do Joseph ele já estava preparando para fazer algo a mais. Então, ele acha que, possivelmente, é o que ele vai fazer, um estúdio maior lá, para que possa haver treinamentos de novos instrutores lá, venham experienciar tudo isso diretamente de lá.
Ok. Carol, obrigada por você.
Obrigada.
Ajudou demais. Sean,
obrigado.
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 Obrigada.
Obrigada for Carol. Obrigado for me.
All right. Obrigada. Both. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean, for your time, for your kindness. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Be safe here in New York, okay?
All right.
Thank you again.
All right.
Thank you, sir. I'm finished in 10 seconds.
Okay.
Agradecer a todo mundo.
Carolina,
Obrigado.
thank you for all your work, for all that. That was, I know how hard that is. I appreciate it. Very good.
Yeah.
It was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Obrigado, pessoal, que esteve aqui. Quinta-feira estamos juntos com a Lolita e o Mauro Bust. Ok? Obrigado a todo mundo. Uma boa noite. Have a good night, Sean.
Bye,
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Obrigado.
Bye-bye.
De nada.